The lore of World of Warcraft must take the prize as the most varied and bizarre in all of video gaming. One minute you're killing gnolls in Red Ridge Mountains and trying to decide which endangered mammal you're going to exterminate today, and the next you're travelling through an interplanetary portal to hunt down a blind simp, a fish woman and a drug addict for reasons Blizzard are still struggling to explain 15 years on. Whether it's time travel, giant robots or dragon sex dungeons, World of Warcraft has something for everyone, plus a lot more that no one ever really asked for. But when it comes to the playable races in-game, if you were to ask me what the weirdest race in WoW is, I would only ever have one answer for you. It's Draenei. Because only in a game like World of Warcraft would someone decide that crossing a goat, a squid and the blue man group would be a good idea. Now I know what you're saying. Vulgrin, you just made a video talking about how trolls are the most unique race in World of Warcraft, and whilst it was a fantastic video which, if not already watched, should be essential viewing for anyone with a functional cerebrum, isn't calling something unique basically the same as calling it weird? Now that's probably what you were thinking, and my answer to that would be no, it's not. But thanks for plugging my last video. I really appreciate your support and sharing my content without me having to do it myself. It really helps. It's all about staying humble, you know? Seriously though, I got a lot of comments on that video arguing that the Draenei are the most unique race in WoW, not trolls, and I get why people might think that, but to me this just highlights a failure to distinguish between something being unique and something being fucking bizarre. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you everything there is to know about the Draenei, and I'm sure once I've finished, you can make up your own mind and you'll understand exactly where I'm coming from. This story all began many years ago when a bunch of fresh-faced, hollow-chested nerds at Blizzard were trying to come up with the foundational lore for their upcoming RTS series. They'd thought about calling the series Interplanetary Race Wars, but decided that Warcraft had a better ring to it. All sorts of influences and inspirations were going into the development of the IP. Every day, the guys would bring in something new to spark their collective imaginations. One guy brought in his copy of Lord of the Rings, another fished out his Conan comics. And then there was Jimmy. Jimmy wasn't interested in such petty things as elves and orcs. He had no time for flamboyant comic book characters and entire chapters describing how Treebeard scratched his arse and sung a song about it. He wanted something more. So when he came into the office one morning and slammed down a giant fucking copy of the Old Testament on the conference table, why would anyone be surprised? You see, Jimmy had gone right back to the source. He understood that to create the best fantasy lore for the game, it only made sense to take inspiration from the first fantasy book ever written. Now you might be wondering where I'm going with this, but to me it's pretty damn obvious. The Draenei are massively inspired by the Israelites of the biblical Old Testament. I mean, think about it. They are an ancient, highly religious society that believes in a single, all-powerful holy force. They are led by an elderly prophet with a pimped-out walking stick and a beard that practically tickles his ballsack, who saved their society from complete destruction at the hands of literal demons by persuading the uncorrupted minority of his people to flee with him on board a sacred vessel called the Genadar, and then he did it again on another called the Exodar. And by the way, Genadar? Exodar? Really? Like the name isn't familiar or anything? Look, copying other people's work is fine if you can get away with it, but someone really ought to have told Jimmy here that plagiarism is a sin. All jokes aside, and here's hoping I don't get smited in the next 5 minutes, I do think that the lore of the Draenei does take its foundational influence from the Bible. If, that is, you were to read the Bible whilst high on LSD watching Battlefield Earth.
Oh, you're too much!
You see, the Draenei are objectively the most sci-fi race in an otherwise predominantly fantasy-themed game. World of Warcraft does often tread openly on the border between the science fiction and fantasy genres, but generally speaking, most of the sci-fi stuff tends to be somehow connected with the Draenei in some way or another. Certainly this was the case in the earlier iterations of the game, you know, before they started to go full Scientology on it. For starters, like the Orcs, the Draenei originate on a different planet than Azeroth, but unlike the Orcs, they didn't use a nether portal to yeet themselves into the Eastern Kingdoms. They got here a different way. Let me take you on a lore journey. When the Burning Legion came to the planet Argus, homeworld of a race called the Eredar at that time, they found a society of extremely smart, magically attuned megaminds. This was exactly what Big Sarge was looking for, as he was in need of some seriously huge-brained individuals to employ as senior management in the Burning Legion, which up to that point had presumably been led by dudes like Manaroth, who, let me remind you, got his wig split by the same orc in 2 different timelines. Hardly the sort of guy I'd want managing my intergalactic empire, but hey, that's just me. The Eredar were a peaceful, functionally immortal race who had advanced to the point of peak civilization long before the Burning Legion even made contact with them. Everyone was driving around in Teslas, and they probably had sex robots, though I'm not sure if that's been confirmed as canon, honestly. The leaders of this perfect society were 3 dudes who were best mates. You know, the lads, the boys, the China plates. You had Archimond, the tough guy who, whilst a genius compared to you and me, still needed help tying his fucking shoelaces compared to the other 2. You had Velen, the nerd, who probably chose to learn the keyboard as a kid instead of the guitar, if you know what I'm saying. And then you had Kil'jaeden, the smart, funny guy, who had a lot going for him and was good with the ladies. You know, Walt Disney, the Wizard of Oz, Otto von Bismarck. You get the picture. It was Kil'jaeden who, when contacted by the Burning Legion, decided it would be a good idea to sign his entire race up to an eternal space cruise involving the violent destruction and assimilation of every planet along the way. Let's be honest, they probably showed him the succubi. That'd do it for me. After promising Archimond a few things like a first edition copy of Brothers in Arms signed by Mark Knopfler, as well as being transformed into a 200-foot tall Giga Chad, everything was in place for the smooth merger of the Eredar into the Legion. Everything except one thing. Velen. You see, Big Daddy V had been contacted by higher powers as well, except it wasn't the Burning Legion speaking to Velen. He was in contact with a bunch of magic space light bulbs called the Naru, who were the embodiment of the light and sworn enemies of the Burning Legion. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I think the Naru are fucking dumb, and I have never been happier than when Illidan blasted the shit out of that one back in Legion. But Velen listened to the Naru, you know, nerd that he is, and he foresaw the horrific transformation of the Eredar that was to come. So he prepared in secret to leave Argus with the trusted few who had no interest in joining the Legion. To cut a long story short, they escaped on a Naru spaceship called the Genadar, though only barely, and KJ never forgave Velen for what he saw as the ultimate betrayal. For a long time after that, we're talking thousands of years, the Draenei, meaning exiles, travelled from world to world to escape the Legion, until they eventually crashed their ship into a planet, kind of a running theme of the Draenei, so get used to that. This planet, which they named Draenor after themselves, kind of a bit fucking self-centered, don't you think, seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. And as they settled in, they even began trading with the locals, a race we know as the Orcs. Can you see where this is going? Things wouldn't stay rosy for long, as eventually Kil'jaeden, being the experienced EVE Online player that he was, swiftly navigated the cosmos and found Draenor, probably attracted by the sound of Velen trying to convert the natives' Age of Empires style. And on that subject, it is funny that despite being an incredibly ancient, wise, apparently charismatic individual who is literally called a prophet, Velen was about as good at convincing the Orcs of his position as he was at driving his fucking spaceship, and much like said spaceship, he piloted the Draenei's relations with the Orcs into the fucking ground, and then took a massive dump on it. You see, the Orcs had started worshipping a sacred mountain that they named Oshugun in the Grand, in which they were able to commune with the spirits of their deceased ancestors, something which the tribal Orcs took very seriously. Velen really didn't help his cause when he explained that this mountain, the most holy of all Orcish sites, was actually just the arse end of the magic flying house that he and his people had come to Draenor on, and in fact it was the dying Naru inside said mountain that was attracting the Orc spirits there in the first place. By this point, Kil'jaeden had already started corrupting the Orcs, and once Manaroth started dealing out his blood like a big green Walter White, there was no coming back. Some Orc players might tell you that what happened next was just an unfortunate episode in their history which is better off forgotten, and that they were themselves victims of the Burning Legion, so they can't really be held accountable. But that's very tall talk coming from the guys who made a fucking road out of the bones of dead Draenei and called it the Path of Glory. Yeah, World of Warcraft is dark, man. Now, a small number of the Draenei were once again able to escape on another spaceship, this time called the Exodar, and we'll get into them in a moment. But you see, they weren't the only survivors of the Orcish genocide. Some of the brave Vindicators and Anchorites who had fought a desperate rearguard action had survived the fighting with the Orcs, but for them, the horror wasn't nearly over. You see, what these Draenei had failed to realise was that just being in the presence of these Orcs juiced up on the fell juju was like the equivalent of taking a dive headfirst into the 4th Chernobyl reactor and then using the elephant's foot as a fucking beanie cushion. They got seriously fucked up. There's no other way of describing it, okay? This is scientifically fucked up here. They started getting crooked fangs, their hands and feet changed shape, they shrunk down to these hunched troglodyte beings who became known rather fittingly as the Broken. Seriously, it couldn't have gotten much worse for these guys. Their world was destroyed, their race was almost exterminated, and they themselves were completely Chernobylized in the process. The only saving grace of the whole situation is that this terrible fate seems to have only occurred to male Draenei, who honestly couldn't have looked much worse than they already did to begin with. I mean, look at this dude. He looks like Mr. Incredible fucked the genie from Aladdin. On a side note, the Broken characters in-game, the named characters like Nabundo and Akama, are by far and away the coolest Draenei characters in my opinion. I love the aesthetic and the way they reverted to a primal, savage state after becoming broken. The fact that Nabundo slowly learned to harness the powers of the elements on Draenor after being abandoned by the light is an awesome story, and if Blizzard would actually put them in the game as an allied race you could play as, instead of giving us fucking shite-forged Draenei instead, I'd probably play a broken shaman on Alliance. But let's get back to Velen and the escaped Draenei on the Exodar, flying through space, looking for somewhere to land, and oh, what a surprise, he's fucking crashed the thing again. Look, I know that Draenei are functionally immortal and orders of magnitude smarter than the average human, but they would have probably benefited from imposing compulsory resits for your driving test once over a certain age as we humans have done. I mean, fucking hell, Velen's gotta be like, what, 10,000 years old? No wonder the old bastard wrote off 2 fucking spaceships. I just hope the Naru have good insurance. Look, I just want to say, I know that Velen wasn't actually piloting the Exodar like fucking Maverick from Top Gun. It's just a joke, okay? Get over yourself. The Exodar eventually crashed on Azeroth, and after some level 5 Night Elves, who had fallen off the edge of Teldrassil like a couple of stupid idiots, washed up on the shore of Azure Mist Isle, encountered a couple of Draenei females, and decided they had no idea what the fuck they were looking at, but they were into it, it was only a short time before the Draenei would be brought into the Alliance, and were pretty much up to speed. By the way, whilst we're on the subject of Azure Mist Isle, what a beautiful zone, right? Personally, I think it's one of the most underappreciated starting areas in-game, and I always loved questing there and on Bloodmist, though you could take your Kessel Run quest and shove it up your arse. But if the Draenei lore that I have just expertly explained, all canon by the way, sounded like a pretty batshit crazy story, it's because it is, and perhaps now you realise why I consider the Draenei to be the weirdest race in World of Warcraft. It's ironic that despite being a minor part of the Alliance, they really do seem like they would rather just get along with everyone. The race that the Draenei belong to, the Eridar, are responsible for many of the worst incidents in the history of Warcraft. I guess that just because they might seem calm and collected, doesn't mean that these righteous squid goats can't get rowdy when they feel like it. All in all, I would say that the Draenei are a solid choice for anyone wanting to play a unique fantasy race with interesting lore that works for some inexplicable reason, with a great starting zone and roots that go back all the way to the RTS games. You really can't go wrong with the Draenei, unless you play a fucking male Draenei, in which case I suggest you take yourself down to the nearest accident and emergency department at a local hospital immediately and get yourself checked out, because you have clearly lost your fucking mind. Hello traveller, you made it all the way along this journey to the end of the video. Congratulations. Did you like it? If you did, you really ought to have hit the like button, you know, that's what it's there for. Duh. Which race would you like for me to cover next? Or would you like me to cover a different topic relating to WoW? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, be well my friends. Bye bye.